Welcome to the Open Mic Podcast Show with Mike Midgley.
Hey, and welcome to the Open Mic Podcast. On today's episode, I'm excited to be covering the topic of elevating the leadership conversation and also asking bigger questions and, growing from the inside out. As leaders, we're always looking for engagement, whether it's rapport building with his teams, whatever that may be and important. And getting that conversation moving is pretty important in today's economic and commercial environments. And I'm super excited to be joined today by Catherine Sherlock from Higher Mindfulness. And Catherine is based out of Vancouver in Canada. Welcome to the Open Mic, Catherine. It's great to have you on our show.
Thank you, Mike. It's great to be here. It's you have great energy. I enjoy your show.
Thank you very much indeed. And I think one of the things I love about doing the open mic, and I say it probably every week, is that it's my favorite time of the week. We work hard all week, and Friday I get to meet amazing guests like yourself. I get to learn. It's a public service for my audience as well to share your knowledge with my listeners. But it also sets me up to go into the weekend positive, for family time and things like that. So, open mic time, Friday morning, Friday afternoon is the best part of the week. If you want to learn a little bit more about what Catherine does, you head over to highermindfulness.com. And you can also follow Catherine on social. You can head over to LinkedIn and just search Catherine Sherlock. We'll put these links in the show notes. You can check her out on LinkedIn, Facebook, and Instagram. So we'll put all those handles in there. If you do a search across the social channels, you can check for conscious leadership as a hashtag. And obviously leadership developments, as well as elevated leadership, and you're going to pick up some of Catherine's content there. So I think overall, Catherine, talking about the subject of elevating the leadership conversation, that's where we're going to get to. But right now, tell us a little bit more about your journey, your background, maybe from when you left college and your journey through your career all the way through to how you got into doing what you're doing today.
Well, I did a master's in environmental studies. So I worked as an environmental and sustainability consultant for a lot of years. And I loved that work. I was very passionate about it. But there was always this part of me in the back that didn't feel I was having a big enough impact. And I wanted to have a bigger impact. And at the same time, there were kind of two parts of me. There was my professional part and my personal part. And as I started to switch over, I started to bring those two areas together, and okay. I started to bring out what had been my personal journey into my professional. I think that's a thing that is happening for a lot of people right now, like that separation between personal and professional. And it's not, we can't become the people we're meant to be with that separation.
Yeah.
So that's been one piece. And then it's been taking my gifts deeper, but it's been really about being able to make bigger transformation in the world. And, when I was starting to look at mindfulness and realizing, oh my gosh, I've got so much background in this. I didn't even realize it. So much more than what most people have in it. And I was looking at it and I was doing some research and I was reading a book by, I think it's David Gels is his name.
Yep.
And he was talking about Monsanto. Now, Monsanto does not have the best reputation as a company, but there was a time when they started to do mindfulness. They started to bring in mindfulness, and they were looking at the Terminator seeds at the time. Now, the Terminator seeds, I don't know if you know what those are.
I've not come across that myself, sorry.
So their Terminator seeds are seeds that only happen for one season, and then you can't get seeds back. A farmer can't get seeds back. They have to go back to the company and repurchase them. Now you can imagine that if that got into our environment, it could be a catastrophe, right?
Of course.
Could have, right? But they had these on, and they were putting these out, and they were gung ho on them. They brought in this mindfulness. They started doing it, and they ended that program. They started listening to their stakeholders.
Yeah.
They ended that program. Now, unfortunately, new CEO took the mindfulness out, and we're back again. But so what I really discovered is that the leadership challenges, all our challenges happen mostly from the inside out.
Yeah.
And we put most of our attention on changing the outside, but we would do much better to put our attention on changing the inside. It's faster, it's more efficient, and it just makes us way happier.
No,
right?
I agree. Yeah, I agree. And you see it a lot in businesses. And I love about the part that you look in your bio. You say that, you're working with sort of those business sort of leaders who look at the bigger picture more than just the bottom line. And the problem is in commercial and, whether it's corporate America, corporate Canada, UK, Europe, EMEA, APAC, doesn't matter. There's such a pressure, improve the bottom line, take the cost out, drive the revenue, get the bottom line going there. And there is so many casualties along that journey. And those casualties, if you're a business leader listening to this, and look, we know the bottom line's important. We know you've got to be profitable to reinvest and grow the company and develop. But, it's not just corporate that you're damaging livelihoods at home. You're damaging a lot of other things, outside of that. And, the bottom line is important, but at what price? And sometimes there is a finer balance that I see where you can achieve, whether it's equilibrium or a more, distributed position, which, like you say, invest in the people, invest in the culture and that mindfulness as well as the bottom line. And, I love the fact that you have it in there, that, the bigger picture. And I think that, I know, we record this on a Friday, we always release on a Monday. If you listen to this, whatever day of the week, shoot me a message using the hashtag #TheOpenMic and let me know what bigger picture that you're currently working on today. And we'll get those questions over to Catherine or reach out to her direct. But thanks for sharing that in the bio, Catherine. It's really important to me as a leader myself that, we take the blinkers off and look at those bigger opportunities.
Yeah, and I was talking with a colleague a while ago, Aviv Shahar, and I realized I wasn't asking big enough pictures, and they were in my heart, but I wasn't asking them. Yeah. And one of that bigger pictures is about the mystery of this life that we're living.
Yeah.
Right? And what's important. And we so often, for so many reasons and so many pressures, put what's really important on the back burner. And that's happening in business all the time.
Yeah.
But if you are starting the conversation at that elevated place where you are not putting those bigger questions on the back burner, you're going to get to all kinds of things like innovation and and the research is showing that you're going to be making more money and all these kinds of things by elevating that conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. So you've also mentioned about personal evolution. And, others have said to you, I know when I read your bio and did some research on the back that, to most it's just a job, but to you, Catherine, you bring your heart and soul to it. You mentioned about the energy and things like that. Tell me about where that burning desire came from your side that, for clients and colleagues to say that, where does that come from? Is it in everybody? Does it just need tapping into? Or do you think you've either got it or you haven't? I'd love to learn, your view around that.
I definitely think that it's in everybody. For me, it was just always there. I've always had this sense of being on a journey, kind of an evolutionary journey, from the time when I wouldn't have had the words for it. I think it's in everybody, but I think it gets a bit pounded out by life. And I honestly believe that, I know we're going to dive more into leadership here, but I think it's one of the things that a leader can do. A true leader, I think, awakens that again in their people, empowers them to live that evolutionary journey, to live their purpose, to live a life that has meaning, right? Because that's what makes us thrive.
Yeah.
And if you do that for your people, they're thriving and they're ready to give back. People want, the people I know, they want to be doing their best, right? Yeah. They want to be doing their best. They want to be living their fullest. They want to be developing their gifts and talents and growing.
Yeah,
I call that the evolutionary urge.
Do you know what? I was just going to say, you took the words out of my mouth there. Did you have a statement for that? Or do you have something that leaders who are listening to the podcast could actually sort of say, how do I spot that in my employees, my team, my middle management, my C-suite? Is there something that can spot in it? Is there maybe employers who are maybe more reserved? It's not that they're not interested. Maybe do they feel not heard? Is there something that they can look out for and sort of drill down? And is there a way to sort of take that forward to sort of extract that energy and urge, out of people?
Yeah, for sure. I think, excuse me. I think some of the companies are on the right track where they're doing the purpose. The purpose, having that purpose, that bigger purpose is that bigger picture piece, right? That you're always working to, and it gives people the meaning. But I think there's a piece missing in that work. And what it is individual purpose.
Right.
So not just to give, I've been doing this research with leaders lately. So I'm finding out these interesting things. And there are two places where we're missing things on purpose. And one is that it's staying only at the executive level, the purpose. It's not being ingrained throughout the company, right? But the second thing is, I think if you really want to get into purpose, you need to teach people how to find their own purpose.
Yeah.
So that they are living a life of purpose. Yeah. And then they align their purpose with the larger purpose of the company, right? And that is one way you get them engaged. And the other way is to create really a climate, a culture of adventure and play.
Yeah.
And some of those bigger questions, those bigger quality questions, will do that for you when you're living from that bigger picture.
Yeah, that's great. And also, it's not maybe a negative. So, as the listeners, please don't think I'm pushing it down that way. But if you do sort of get them to find their own purpose and encourage and help, it may be that they cannot align to the company's values or company's purpose, which means that they're probably not a good fit. And, that maybe somebody else could come into that seat and get a better result for your company. But it's also sort of, in a polite way, giving people permission to sort of go and, do better elsewhere. And as awful as that sounds, we have a policy in some of our coaching programs where it's the right person in the wrong seat, or, the wrong person in the right seat. And that's also, I suppose, relevant here, isn't it? That, they're only going to get the best work, they're only going to be happy as people, and the leaders are only going to be able to, become, effective if everybody's on the same page or pushing in the same direction. Do you see a lot of that happening, where when companies go down this route, that maybe then, employees do leave? Some will step up, but maybe some leave as well.
I think, you're always going to have employees leaving. And I think that's a really good point, that that some will leave because they'll realize, hey, my purpose doesn't align with this company. But, if you discover that was there all the time anyway, right? And it was bogging things down. So, because that person didn't feel fulfilled, that person didn't feel, they may have been doing a good job, but when you find somebody who does align and bring them in, you're going to get that much more out of it. Yeah, and I think, again, it's the bigger picture. Most of the leaders, the leaders I'm talking to, they're talking about, I want to help people live more fully. Yeah. I want to help people be their fullest self, from leader after leader after leader. So I think you can't say, oh yeah, you can only grow until you're going to leave my company. It doesn't work that way.
No, it doesn't. Back to your journey. Obviously, you got a master's, and then obviously you progressed down this road. And I pick up on something that you mentioned earlier. That I think you mentioned something like you took stock, and there was so much and more of this in you that you didn't realize, type of thing. So, just talk to us about that transition. We're all entrepreneurs. Obviously, the show's aimed at entrepreneurs who are trying to bridge the gap between the idea and successful implementation. Talk to us a little about how you transferred and you're doing what you're doing, and more of that journey, really.
One of the things I think that when we're stuck, or we have aspirations that are in our in a deeper part of us, a calling or something, I think we're being asked to take our gifts deeper, to take our self-expression deeper. And instead, what we usually do is just fight against it.
Yeah, push back.
Kind of like, oh no, I don't want to do that, or I don't know. But instead of just stopping, well, what does this mean? What does this mean for me to go deeper into this life?
Yeah.
And we're all wanting that connection, that empowerment, that that sense of learning, that sense of developing, right?
Yeah, I get it. Absolutely. Yeah. And think about it this way, listeners, that, what is your purpose? What do you want? What makes you happy? I know we're going to talk and dig deep into certain specific areas, Catherine, but is there maybe a formula is the wrong word, but is there something that, I'm sure there's a lot of people listening to the podcast who and maybe in a job, or maybe they don't want to be in a job, maybe they've realized that they want to, maybe the passions or they're elsewhere. Is there something that they can sort of do? Is there a program? Is there, what would you recommend to them? Obviously, is there a starting point for them to sort of unravel this bowl of spaghetti to start finding that, purpose and things like that?
Yeah, I mean, certainly getting with someone who can help you define your purpose, help you understand it, right? That's one thing. The other key piece, the most transformational thing that I have seen is increasing your awareness and emotions. Yep. And when I say emotions, I mean digesting emotions. Now, we live in a society where there are so many pressures for us not to listen to our emotions. Yeah. It's constantly all around us, and we don't have those skills. I run into very, very, very few people who have those skills of how to digest emotions. Nah. When you begin to digest those emotions, what we normally do is we suppress them.
Yep.
We push them away, we push them down. But it's a type of disrespect for the self. Right? We're not listening to the self. We're not really listening to the self. We're
refusing to accept the truth type of thing.
Yeah, we're refusing to accept the truth. And the other thing is, these emotions are seen as bad. They're seen as negatives, right? They are not negatives. They come with wisdom. They come with information. So when you digest them, you actually take them in, you reintegrate them because you've pushed them away. They're away from you. You're using all the energy to keep them down, which is like trying to keep a beach ball down in a pool of water. It's a huge amount of energy. So you have to learn how to bring them in, how to listen to them, how to digest them. And it's, when I say digestion, I use that because it's like taking the nutrition out of them and letting the wastes go, right? There's parts that you take and there's parts that you let go.
Absolutely. That's a great way of putting it because, the human body does that, as you say, when you consume food and, these emotions. I get what you're saying because life can be very pressured. It can be it is full of emotion. And sometimes we do things that, we have an outburst and, maybe disrespectful to people. Sometimes we may be too accommodating and those emotions are at both ends of the scale. So do you think, I suppose leadership as a whole and, getting this, elevated conversation going around leadership, it is difficult sometimes to accept those emotions and deal with them. Sometimes, in a busy environment, it could be, well, let's just park that. We'll be okay tomorrow, and let's sleep and it'll be okay tomorrow. You move on, but you're not really moving on, Catherine, are you? You're still having those inherent sort of either positive or negative emotions, and they're going to resurface at some point, and no doubt they're going to get worse as we go along.
Yeah, you get people talk about the baggage, right? That's the undigested emotions that you're carrying around, right? Yeah. But you can digest them and reduce that amount of baggage. And it takes you into greater awareness. It takes you into, basically what it does is it unlocks choice.
Yeah.
So those two things, increasing awareness and digesting emotions very much work together.
Yeah.
And they unlock possibilities. They unlock your choices because otherwise you're on autopilot.
Yeah.
But you got to do it consciously. It's not going to happen.
No, absolutely.
You've got to do it. It's not. Yeah. It's because, like I said, there's so many pressures to not listen. There's so many pressures to be logical and rational, and there's a lot more out there.
Yeah, I agree. So, if we think about this sort of topic in a little bit more detail, could you sort of come up with a couple of examples for the listeners? So the experiences either in your own career where, maybe those emotions have not been digested fully and dealt with and, from maybe a negative side, but also finishing on a positive side where they have been and the different outcomes. So could you share a couple of real life examples where maybe some of the listeners could be thinking, hey, yeah, I see that in my workplace. Yeah, that's relevant. That sounds like me, or that sounds like my boss or my team or one of my middle management. Have you got a couple of examples on both sides of the coin that you could share with us? where maybe, that negative emotion's not being dealt with? What's the outcome? What do you see either in your career and, when you've been working or something like that? Is there something that comes to mind?
Well, there's something that comes to mind is that, when you're not digesting your emotions, you stay in relationships that you shouldn't. And that includes work relationships. I'm talking work as well, right? It's funny, but this is a surprising piece of research, but I ran across it quite a while ago, and they found that the highest percentage of workplace victims of workplace bullying were people with high emotional intelligence.
Right.
Now, isn't that a bit surprising?
Wow, I am surprised. Yeah.
Yeah. And so, I mean, there's a whole other conversation to be had about emotional intelligence, but this not digesting emotions. So too often, emotional intelligence becomes managing of emotions, and so by digesting the emotions, all of a sudden you go. You sort of go, what was I doing? Like in situations where you kept yourself, or you digest emotion, and all of a sudden something, like writing an article becomes easy, or whatever was you couldn't get through, it becomes easy, or things that seemed like large challenges were like, oh, yeah, that's not that big a deal, because you have actively digested the emotion out of it.
No,
you've actually listened to yourself. And also it takes you, I mean, this journey that I'm on for work right now has come from a deeper and deeper listening.
Yeah, that's great. And, I know how passionate you are about it, the energy, the focus and the control for it. And I suppose as we move out of that sort of bio sort of side, and thank you for sharing that, because there's some deep thoughts in there for all of us leaders. We all have a responsibility. If you're listening here on the podcast, you're watching it on one of the channels, we have a responsibility, to leadership, and that's not just as employees at home, as father or mother figures. It's important that you acknowledge that. And as Catherine said, that you sort of digest that and move it forward. So tell us a few other things about yourself, Catherine, before we get into the question side. What else do we know about you? What else is important with the journey and things like that? Is there anything else you want to share with us?
I can't actually think of anything, Mike. I think we've covered most of it.
Yeah, I mean, but obviously living there in Vancouver, up in Canada, and the backdrop of where you looks amazing and things like that. And I know
I live on an island. That I don't actually live in Vancouver. I live on an island.
Yeah, that's it. Oh, awesome. But I'm saying it looks amazing. The backdrop, it looks like something out of a dream holiday chalet or something like that. But I mean, being in the right environment, I suppose, is where I'm leading to as well. If you're in that right environment, it doesn't matter if you're suffering from domestic abuse or workplace abuse or be motivated in any of those situations. Being in the right environment is always going to help, isn't it? And it maintains the confidence and the positivity and things like that. And I think that's going to make you more aware of your situation as well. Whereas if you're in such a darker sort of tunnel and place, that awareness closes down, and it is important to be in that. I mean, I certainly find that, Catherine, from my side, if I do my best work when I'm in an environment that's, conducive to what I'm trying to achieve, whether I need a quiet space, whether I want to be in a busy office and, the hustle and bustle of that stuff, it does leadership and getting that leadership conversation moving depend, on what environment that you're in. Do you find that, or is it down to different people in different environments?
I mean, yeah, for sure. Environment is a big piece of what you can accomplish. But I think, again, we in corporations, they spend so much time putting these pieces, these, wonderful pieces in place, and they ignore the inner environment, the culture. Yeah. The culture or the inner environment of the people, right? And I compare that to a soup where you've got a broth that's gone off and you're buying the most beautiful organic vegetables and foods and putting them into this broth, but it's never going to taste good. It's never going to work.
Yeah, because it's toxic to start with, isn't it?
Because it's toxic to start with. So getting back, to empowering you from the inside out, and much of that, if you watch, what makes your day good, what makes your day bad, it has a lot to do with emotions.
Yeah, absolutely.
But we've set those on the back burner. We've said, no, those are not relevant. They are bad. They are not logical. We'll just put those out.
Yeah, brilliant. No, well, thank you for sharing that. It's been amazing sort of learning that. And it's always a difficult situation to sort of grapple and own up to about that emotion and that, self-acknowledgement or whatever. And, I'd love to know what your thoughts are. If you're struggling with that, use the hashtag The Open Mic, just send us a message, open a conversation about it. If you don't want to do it in a public forum, just send me a direct message. You can do that on Twitter. You can do that on LinkedIn. Be more than happy to engage with you. And of course, you can connect with Catherine and shoot her a message as well. We'll put the show, Catherine's social links in the show notes, so you can connect through and make contact with Catherine there. So as we move into the topical sort of side of, elevating leadership in conversation, you talk, Catherine, and you cover like the broken state of leadership development. Could you cover this a little bit more for us, and what you're seeing, in real life examples?
Yeah, for sure. Thanks, Mike. A lot of the leadership development is based around this trait theory. So it's like, here are the attributes of what a good leader is, right? And if you do a search on Google, you'll find lists and lists and lists of them. And what's funny is they're all different.
Yep.
But so somebody comes up, maybe they do some research into some leaders somewhere, and they come up with a list of these must-have attributes, these must-have traits. And then they go into a corporation, and they go, here you go. Here are the must-have attributes. And the only one I found that in common is communications.
Yep.
But so you go in and you say, you got to have good communications. Well, that doesn't help. So all of these things, they go in, but it's this outside-in approach, right? Mm. And I'm now coming from the perspective that I think we're meant here in life to deepen our own expression. Mm. And that the way you're going to become the best leader that you can be is by continually deepening your own expression. Yeah. That's what we're called to do. That's the call of the authentic self, as I call it. And
sorry, apologies, go on.
Go ahead. You had a question?
No, I was just going to say the authentic self. What an amazing statement there. I was going to say, tell me more about that. That's great.
Well, I don't know if I've talked about this on a podcast before, but I think that answering that call of the authentic self is really a key component of life. Yeah. And that call can be very subtle and very whispering. But as you begin to answer it, it changes your life. Yeah. And again, as a leader, a lot of leadership challenges start from the inside out, right? Yeah. In fact, probably most. And we're looking at all these problems that are the outer problems. We look at them from the outside in. And that's not the most efficient way to solve them. We need to be practical in doing the work, but we need to be doing it from both sides. Yeah. The outside actions and the insides. Because when you do that, when you're answering the call of the authentic self and you're doing those kinds of things, you get to more inspired action.
Yeah. And, when you say that about the inside out, that's a little bit more like treating the root of the problem as opposed to the symptoms or the cause of it at the outside, isn't it? It's that self-admission, raising his hand to sort of say, hey, this is where I'm at, this is the real situation, and owning that sort of truth, I suppose, which is, linking back to the authenticity. So I love that. So tell me more about EQ and super EQ. For those who are not sure what it means, tell us what it means and tell us what the difference are.
Well, so emotional intelligence, I think probably everybody at this point has heard about emotional intelligence and has heard about the benefits of it that the research shows. Yeah. But there are also some issues. And I think that for most people, the emotional intelligence is pretty basic level. But what we need to become aware is more of the issues that are happening. And we talked about the one earlier about the bullying one, right? Yeah. That's a big deal that we need to look at, right? The other thing around it is it tends to become more about managing emotions and managing emotions in terms of controlling them. So there's two ways. There's one that's suppression, which is just suppressing the emotion, and there's reappraisal. Now, reappraisal is good, but it's limited. But suppression is what's happening mostly. So you're actually pushing down the emotions. So that means the conversations, like everybody's being very polite and, not bring up any conflict. And that means that the really authentic conversations that need to happen are not happening.
Really? Yeah.
It's one of the biggest things I've seen in this research. And it's not that the leaders are talking about it. It's what I'm garnering from kind of in between what they're saying, where their issues are.
And they're the real issues because, like you say, you're seeing this real, aren't you? Live, and you're observing this, and it's to a level where you're actually either researching it or documenting it. So yeah, most people are missing this. Do you think, or do they choose not? Do they know it's there? Do they choose not to sort of? Because we all get the people who say, I just don't like conflict. I don't want to get it out. I'll just let it pass. It'll be okay tomorrow. And, to a degree, they're pacifying today, but suffering again tomorrow, I suppose, aren't they?
Yeah, I think, I think his name is Pema Chodron, talks about idiot compassion. Have you heard of idiot compassion?
Do you know, I've seen something flash around on that one before, but I'm not qualified to have a qualified discussion about it. But it's something that's come back to the top of the agenda 2 or 3 times. I've heard that said. Yeah.
Well, it's basically allowing, unhealthy situation to go on. And so when you're not having these authentic conversations, you're allowing unhealthy situations to go on. We do this all the time. We do it in our private lives, in our professional lives, and everywhere in between. Now, I think I don't know if you can have authentic conversation with every single person, because they take some energy, right? But I think you have to look at the relationships that are important to you in your life. And if you're a leader, that means the people you're leading, and say, where am I not having authentic conversations with these in my life?
That's a great.
So the relationships that you actually want to have, the ones that are important to you, you better make sure you're having authentic conversations there.
Yeah, and what I always do on the show, Catherine, is when somebody says something profound, I always ask you to back up and repeat that. It saves people hitting the rewind button on the podcast or something like that. Just cover that again. Is identifying where you talked about identifying, what's most important to you, and then having authentic conversations, because that is absolute dynamite advice. And whatever you take out of this podcast, this to me is an eye-opener, and I think it's so relevant. Just repeat what you said just earlier about identifying them right and dealing with them, because they're the most important.
Yeah, you need to identify where you're not having those authentic conversations, with whom and where you're not having them, and then how you're going to have them.
Yeah.
And this is going to change. You do that, it saves marriages, it saves companies, and it takes companies to whole new levels.
Yeah.
So often, a lot of times I'm dealing with leaders and they're struggling. One of the things that comes up is people management. So people management and also leadership development.
Yeah.
So mentoring the leadership team, mentoring other leaders, issues of succession. And a lot of times there's a lot of frustration around that. Mm. So first of all, they haven't digested that. But second of all, they don't realize that by not having this conversation, they're enabling the problem to continue, because they're not being emotionally honest.
Yeah.
Right?
It's a mask, isn't it, that they're wearing?
It's a mask. And so they're thinking, they're like, I don't really want to get into it, or it's hard to tell people as a leader, things that you're not doing right, or, it's a skill set to develop, to be able to tell people the hard truths. Yet you have to be able to do that.
Yeah.
And you have to be able to share, your hard truths, and do it vulnerably as well, where you're, struggling or falling short, and those kinds of things. So often, so many of the conflicts that are coming up in companies and in organizations are due to this lack of these authentic conversations, of these people not really being real. They think, these people don't care about growth, or they're not like me, and they're so frustrated, but they haven't actually shown up themselves.
Yeah, it's interesting. Interesting. I used to work with a non-exec. He was the chief exec of Wix DIY stores, Barnes Noble. He was on this board there in the States and things like that as well. And he always used to say to me, my companies rot from the top. And he said, never rot from the bottom. You know, the troops, it's the leadership who either don't deal with things or mask it, and it's like a compost. It just rots down and the leaders drop into the middle management drop into the employees. And all too often, because, you know, whether you're a leader, a boss, call it whatever you will, I've seen it where there's egos involved and self-entitlement involved. And then they don't even hold themselves accountable. You know, they'll walk through the office swearing, or they will be rude to people, they're purposely awkward, but are very keen to criticize, you know, everybody else. But sometimes they fail to see, you know, the root of the problem is themselves. And, you know, it's an awful trait. And, most of what I see, Catherine, is where the individuals in senior positions have sort of been early in the company and then sort of got that position because they've been there the longest, more than because they're the best fit for the business. And it's an awful position because it does hold companies back. It stops the growth. And also it sees good people leave the business, maybe in more junior positions, because, you know, good people just won't tolerate that. And, it is disappointing. And, you know, those authentic conversations, whether you're the leader of the business, the owner of the business, you're an operating or an investment board level, it doesn't really matter. Having those conversations, I think, is right, not only to, you know, motivate and bring forward the best talent and identify, and as Catherine said, really, you know, improve the performance of the team and the business, but also to weed out those people who maybe are in the self-entitlement list, for sure. I see that more of a disease in small to medium businesses, but, you know, I've seen it in the highest level of businesses as well, where you think, you know, wow, these are public companies and this is what really goes off. And, you know, you think that they'd be super clean on governance because they're public, but sometimes it's worse in those companies than it is in the smaller ones. And it's like, oh my gosh, you know, there's like dawn of reality. So it is an interesting style.
And it's key to living our greater lives is that, you know, having those authentic conversations. So key.
Absolutely so key. And so get it on your list, you know, start to do that, identify it down, think about where you're going with that, and, you know, shoot us a message, use the hashtag The Open Mic. Love to hear from you about, you know, what the type of authentic conversations that you're either having or need to have. That would maybe be important. So as we move on, Catherine, you talk about next level mindfulness and the mediation side of that. You know, maybe a framework for mediation. There's so many different ways of doing that and things like that. But is there a key to work through to achieve this? You know, if the listeners are out there or myself, we want to go to that next level of mindfulness and mediation, what's the starting point? You know, what should I be aware of? How do I get started? What should I know?
Well, I think that we're teaching meditation and learning meditation in ways that aren't as powerful as they could be.
Okay.
So we normally learn, you know, we're taught one method and we normally learn that and we just sit down and do it. But I think we want to start with the outcomes. We want to start with, if we're going to commit time to this practice, what actual outcomes do we want to have?
Yeah.
Let's raise the level on this thing called meditation. And in fact, let's not even think about it as meditation necessarily. Let's think about it as altered states of consciousness or deeper states of consciousness, learning to use natural states in a more profound ways to advance our performance, to advance our learning, to advance our emotional healing, all those kinds of things, and to have more peak experiences in our lives.
Yeah, sorry.
So starting, going to the end point and going, okay, what actually outcomes do I want out of this that I'm going to sit down? And the other thing that people don't realize is all those benefits that are reported back in the media about meditation, if you start to pull back the research and look at it, they're researching all different kinds of meditation practices. And then they come out and everybody says, oh, there's all these benefits. But each practice has benefits and limitations. And you need to know that and figure out which ones. Like, if you're going to do meditation on the breath, it's not going to be a very good meditation for creativity.
Yeah.
It's going to be a good meditation for focus. It's not going to get you to the deeper brain states likely. So knowing all these things and being able to choose, these are my goals. And then the other thing about it is it was secularized. When it became corporate mindfulness, it was secularized. And I think that was great because it allowed it to just spread tremendously. But there's a piece that's missing, and I hear it all the time when I talk with people, is that wanting to connect with something greater than themselves.
Yeah.
And that piece went missing. So bringing that one back in.
And sometimes people are fearful for doing that. I mean, I'm very open about my faith and my spirituality. I don't mind sharing that. Some people are a bit more reserved around that and, think, oh, that's not important. That's not relevant to this situation. But it is. One of my favorite books, and what I studied when I started to turn my life around when I was early 20s, was Think and Grow Rich by Napoleon Hill. And I know it's a cliched book, but it generally was. I must have read that. I still read it 2 or 3 times a year anyway, just to keep on top of it. But they talk about faith and spirituality. And, Jim Rohn, another one of my sort of great sort of mentors or philosophers that I follow and, read and consume the material. They talk about spirituality and faith. And, to me, I think it's super important. And, I'm not ashamed to open up and talk around that. I did a podcast with Heather Parody on Unconventional Leaders and went real deep down into that sort of section about it. And I think that's super important, Catherine. And, my only advice around that, not being qualified at this level, but is don't hold back on that, and it's not what people think, it's what you think. And, if they don't agree with you or they want to take fun out of you or they think it's irrelevant, that's their life choice. It's not yours. And if that's going to get you going forward, it's going to move you to the next, sort of level of mindfulness and help you, move through all these things, whether it's authentic conversations, then go for it. And, what your view on that, Catholic spirituality and faith and things like that, how much of is that a mandatory core element to get to that, or do you think it depends on the person?
I think it depends on the person. I mean, you can just do meditation for stress. But, when we started this conversation, we talked about elevating the leadership conversation, right? But just elevating the conversation in general means bringing in that piece of not just your daily responsibilities, not just your deeper expression. Hopefully you're evolving and coming from your core competencies and all that, but also this question of what are we doing here? What is this deeper mystery of life, right? To bring that in. That's a lot of juiciness to bring into life, right?
Absolutely.
And can we bring that in more, please? Like, can we start having those bigger conversations everywhere? Because can you imagine how much that will change what we're doing?
I mean, it's just so when you're in the day job or the grind of life, and that grind is not necessarily negative, it can be positive as well, looking after the kids, rushing around, the car breaks down in the rain, it doesn't matter, positive, negative, you achieve something in sports, why are we here? What's the purpose? It's sometimes easy to skip over as irrelevant or immaterial, but it does tax the mind, Catherine, doesn't it, when you start thinking a little bit deeper? And, for me, I like on Sunday afternoon, I like to sort of lock myself away for an hour, read a book, get my diary organized for next week and, things like that. And just really do a lot of reflection time, even if it's 50 minutes, an hour and a half, whatever I can get, based on the demands of the family and what I've got going. That's how I deal with that sort of side. But, is there, people with busy lives, maybe families growing up, hectic schedules, is it just a matter of blocking that time out and treating it like a client appointment or a doctor's appointment that you just got to do? Or is there a better way of doing it a little bit easier that still can get the same results? Because I like to book it out as a slot in my diary. That disciplines me to go and do what I need to do. But, I'd just be keen to understand your thoughts because, like you say, it's such an important part to think about, reflection, deeper, purposes. And just share a few ideas with us there. Is there a better way of, how do maybe you approach it or what do you see as successful?
Yeah, I think it goes back to that purpose piece, Mike. Like we were talking about that and that individual purpose piece. Well, we know we've done the research to see what the benefits are for an organization that does that kind of purpose piece.
Yeah.
It has the same benefits when you do it as an individual. So, I mean, we are in overwhelm and there's all this stuff to get done and all this, but it kind of lightens that load when you know why you're living. and what your daily things are for, then those grinding things aren't so grinding, right? But also it helps you make decisions better in your life. It frees you from a lot of inner turmoil. So I'll give you an example. I mean, everybody wants to be successful, right?
Yep.
You want to be successful, I assume?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. But what does that mean for you? What means successful to you and what means successful to me are, probably have some similarities and probably have some differences, right?
Yeah.
And yet, because we haven't defined that term, we're running around and we see somebody being successful and then we feel bad because that we haven't accomplished that, and so it creates turmoil. But once you define purpose and you define, which is kind of like defining success as well, then you're like, oh yeah, that's great. I'm so glad they're doing that. But my piece is over here.
Yep.
And I'm out of overwhelm. And I know I know don't chase that or chase this or, another shiny ball, because my purpose is here and I can't do it all.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. And, it's when you mentioned about success, the natural default that a lot of people say is, hey, we've got money or whatever it may be. But to me, and I think when I define success, I think it depends at the stage that you're actually at, whether that's in your career or your life. And I use this example quite a lot. So I apologize for the repetition to the listeners who's heard it before. And that is, if you go and check out Steve Jobs' sort of speech on his deathbed, because that sort of erodes the money argument in a lot of ways, because it didn't matter how much money he had, it didn't help him there and then. And, to me, success is, health, good family relationships, a great social circle, being able to give back to worthy causes. Money to me is probably 5, 6 or 7 on the list. Now that's just my side. You might be listening out as a listener and say, hey, well, I'm a bit earlier in my career, or I'm a bit later in my career, and I've got a different purpose or whatever. But I agree with you totally, Catherine, that once you have that purpose understood and you're living through that, and you are actually living through it every single day, you tend not to notice, the material things of others as much, or the status of others as much, because you are focused on that exact purpose, and it brings a lot of satisfaction. And I have a couple of payments that go out of my bank every month, and they're to my favourite charity, which is the NSPCC, the National Society of Prevention of Cruelty to Children. I back them as a corporate sponsor, and I back them as a private donor. And every time I see that direct debit or that bank payment go out, it actually puts a smile on my face, because it's and mostly when I see a direct debit go out of my bank, I don't have a smile on my face, but it's like, oh no, but for that one, it's like, yeah, because that's me, as part of me giving back. And it's really, really important that, you feel like you're contributing, and that's part of my purpose, and helping, underprivileged kids and doing my bit. You can't help everybody, and you can't help everybody to, solve, the problems, whatever your good cause is, whatever your purpose is, it doesn't really matter. You will never, cure world hunger or, epidemics or anything like that. They can be contained to a degree, but you can feel like you're doing your part. And we said, off air, and as we started to come on it, the Open Mic podcast, to me, it's all about public service. It's all about giving back. It's meeting, and I class it as a self-education as well. And, to me, I can never see myself stop podcasting. I don't think I'll ever lose that, that drive or enthusiasm for it, because I just get to meet people all around the world, and I have such a good blast. And to me, that's part of my overall purpose of giving back and sharing, and delivering altruism, throughout that sort of methodology, mentality, call it what you want. And I'd love to know, what, as the listeners, what your purpose is. Have you got it figured out? Do you understand it? Do you need some work on it? If you have, share it. Use the hashtag The Open Mic. Connect with Catherine on LinkedIn. I'm sure she'd be delighted to sort of hear what your purposes are, and if you live into that means, and how is that doing for you? And apologies for going on about that one there, Catherine, but it is important for me, that part. And I really love the purpose. And if you haven't figured it out, you are missing out for sure.
Yeah, because it elevates your life. Basically,
Absolutely.
It elevates the conversations in your life, and
all of them. Yeah, absolutely.
But don't make it too. The other thing is, purpose is probably larger than you can accomplish in a lifetime.
Yeah.
In this, it's the only thing we know about this world is that this is a limited engagement. We're in a limited engagement.
You've got
but don't, people work so hard on their purpose, and I would say don't fret about it. Like come up with a working purpose, if that's it. I mean, I teach techniques to do it, but come up with a working purpose for now if you don't have a way to do it, and just work with that. Like don't people get so bent out of shape about this purpose, right? It's like, no, you'll know, like
it clicks, doesn't it?
Yeah, come up with a draft. It's okay if you're working with a draft. It's okay to change it. It's okay to, as you grow.
There you go. You've got total permission from Catherine there. Work in progress. Stick it in the WIP folder and keep working on it. That's awesome. So as we wrap out of the show, Catherine, we're going to talk about innovation. And we're going to talk about that leadership intuition a little bit more. We've dipped in and out of these subjects throughout the podcast, but if we could just really sort of bring those two subjects together, that innovation, that leadership intuition, tell us more about that.
Yeah, I think that, again, it goes a little bit with the suppressing of the emotions. And here's the thing is you can't suppress one thing without suppressing a lot. And we're moving into a time of whole brain thinking.
Yep.
And we've kind of lost that. We are very, Western educated, right? We're very left brain. We have a very scientific culture that has really permeated. Those ideas have really permeated our cultures. But there's a lot more. Science, the mental and the analytical side is not the only way to get information.
Yep.
But the other side, the right brain side, has a whole different language. And it's so funny. People are so frightened of intuition. And it's like, it's nothing. It's just another way of getting information.
Yep.
And
different way.
Yeah. And it's part of that juice, that extra juice, the same way the emotions bring in the juice, right? The emotions are the juice of your life. So is that intuition, that part. When you start to tap into it more and more, and you can get more and more information, and you learn how to have these deeper conversations and tap into deeper information. And it's, a lot of innovation that talking about in companies. It's more just like coming up with new ideas.
Yeah.
It's not really shifting whole industries, which is what we need right now to solve this kind of social and environmental problems in the world. We need real innovation, and real innovation takes a whole brain. And so that's why, I talk about the meditation part too, that part of it, but also the digesting of emotions, and really related to that is the beliefs, like removing those beliefs that are limiting you. Just that one way to find them is by going through your emotions, and then you'll hit those beliefs and go, oh, that's not true, right? So. But yeah, that whole brain thinking that we need to start to practice, and you can't explain it because it's experiential.
Yeah.
Right. It's like being in flow. You can't really explain flow. It's experiential, and I think a lot of times what people are talking about as flow is very kind of a superficial level of flow. Real flow, as in what's his name? Who wrote the first book on it? His name, the guy whose name is unpronounceable. At least I don't know. The guy with Michel Chevanesky or something like that. Yep. He was talking about a deep level flow. He was talking about being in the brain state of theta, where you are so immersed in whatever you're doing, and it's usually something creative like writing or working through a problem or coming up with a webinar or painting. But you are so immersed that you lose. You are not aware of your surroundings. You're not aware of time. You are just there.
Yeah,
it's a lovely state.
It is, and some of the greatest work has ever been achieved in that zone. And I call it the entrepreneur twilight zone, and that's what I've done over the life. Well, that's maybe the wrong analogy, but it's just mine. And for the listeners, know I've got some crazy analogies that I use to describe things. But it's really important. And an innovation, you mentioned, solving some of these social, economic, commercial issues that we have out there. we have to keep moving forward as business, as entrepreneurs, as listeners of the show. Being in the right state. You cannot be innovative if you're flat. You cannot be innovative if you're not being honest with yourself. Having those open conversations and things like that. There is always going to be something pulling against you. And I'm not sure if this is right, Catherine. It's my experience. I've been an entrepreneur now since 1994. I started my first business, so I was at 26 years. And I've had 2 enterprises that were in the flow. And they just made money. They was wildly successful. One became a market leader. It's getting that last digit of the lock dialed in. And, like Catherine said, it starts with you. It starts inner, you need to have that inner peace, that inner self sorted, that treating that root, not just the symptoms outside. So, no, that's great. I really love it. And I think it all connects together really nice with that next level mindfulness, the innovation, that intuition. And thank you very much indeed for sharing that with us today, Catherine. It's been an absolute pleasure speaking with you.
I just want to add in one thing.
Yeah.
What you just said, Mike, about getting it sorted. Okay, we gotta lose that one because we will never get it all sorted.
No, you're absolutely right.
But we gotta learn to enjoy the process of sorting.
Sorting, absolutely. There's just to put your mind at rest. I wrote a blog. It's called The Continuous Loop to Success. And you see these articles, don't you, on social where it's like, oh, success is not a straight line. And they show a zigzag instead. And I don't believe that's true either. I dismiss both of those theories. And this is where everybody gets the chance to shoot me down. But it's on our blog. You can go and read that. And it's called The Continuous Loop to Success, Catherine. And the way I describe it, and this is not related to business, mindfulness, leadership, it's just everything. But what happens is you start out, and if you imagine an Olympic track, it's got 8 lanes, and you start out, and then you start running around the bend, and that's figuring everything out, like you said, the sorting out. And then what happens is you get on the back straight, and then it eases out a little bit as you start to master some of these disciplines, and you think, oh, I've got this figured out, and look at me, woohoo! You start free rising, and then guess what? You hit another bend, and it's like, oh, you're figuring it out again. So then you hit the home straight, you think, great, I can run to the finishing line, and you start sprinting to the finishing line for the gold medal, but only to hear that the bell doesn't ring. And then there's another corner. And then what that means is you've gone from either pre or seed or investor to startup, to scale up, to growth, to, mature business, or expansion or whatever. And at every single level, there is always another problem or another opportunity or something to figure out. And you're absolutely right. So thank you for calling me on that. And it does make sense, but I am on the right page. And it's just that, and that's why I call success is a continuous loop, which never ever ends. And you're just changing lanes to the second lane or the third lane or the fourth lane. So I don't know if that makes some kind of sense to you, Catherine, but that's how my crazy mind sees it.
I like that metaphor, Mike. I think, and I think that's the thing is we want to grow. We want to grow. We want all these bigger things outside. But the thing is, to accomplish that, you got to grow. You got to personally develop. You got to grow on the inside, right?
You have. Absolutely.
You are called to do it. So
hopefully. Well, look, it's been an absolute pleasure having you on the show. We've talked around so much today, and thank you for sharing. If we were to sort of try and summarize up, elevating the leadership type of conversation, getting it down to sort of 3 pro tips, Catherine, for the listeners, what would that look like? Could you just share those sort of 3 pro tips that people can take hold of and try and apply practical to get going?
Yeah, I think one of them is that that question that came up during the interview, which is, where are you not having authentic conversations, and who do you need to have them with?
Yeah.
Which relationships are important to you? Invest in those. Which ones are you planning to keep around for a while? Yeah. So have the authentic conversations there, and then I think. Learning, I think the first stage of emotional awareness is always learning to become aware, is awareness. That is, awareness is everything about unlocking choice. Yeah. And so, start to listen. For example, I can tell you about one leader who was, he was, I'm in the middle of writing an article on this. So he was dealing with some criticism from one of his employees, yeah. And he found it really hard to deal with. He found it put him in inner turmoil. And what he was saying, instead of digesting that emotion, was saying to himself, he really values kind of servant leadership. And he was like, this is not who I should be as a leader. I shouldn't be reacting to this emotion, to this criticism. But the fact is he was. So start where you are. It's not a bad thing. You're not bad because you're reacting to criticism. It's just very human. Yeah. But start to listen to it. Why are you reacting? As soon as you hear yourself, I shouldn't be feeling this, there's your cue to start listening, right? So that, okay. And then in terms of leadership, I would say, I love this question. It's one I ask regularly of myself, is where are you not being a leader to yourself in life? Where are you not being a leader in life?
That's brilliant. I love that. So whenever you listen to this show, write that down. Where are you not being a leader in yourself? That is amazing, because that's a direct question that you cannot dodge. Now, you could say, I'm going to shelve it, or, you can play and hide behind the facade of, I'm a leader in all places. But, when in reality, I've got the cold light of day test, Catherine, whereas I get up pretty early in the morning, and it's usually dark outside, and it's, here in England, it's pretty cold in the winters. And I call it the cold light of day test. And before the phone rings, or before I'm online, or before I've woken up and had some breakfast fully and things like that, I ask myself all the tough questions right early in the morning, because there's only me, this deathly silence, and I can't hide behind it, or, I've got to answer this email, or I've got to be somebody's at my meeting door, or whatever it would be. So I call it the cold light of day test. And, where are you not being a leader? I love that question. Thanks for sharing with it. That's amazing.
Thank you, Mike.
Go and do that. It's been an absolute pleasure having you on the show, Catherine. Thanks ever so much for taking the time out of your busy diary. I really appreciate it. We should hopefully all going to be starting talking to elevate that leadership conversation after today. Thanks again.
Thank you, Mike. It's been great. And it's been great to talk with you and to play with you and to show up. Thank you.
It's a pleasure. And for you as our listeners, we appreciate the time you've invested in our show. We appreciate you've got a lot of choice in the podcast market. So as always, thanks for continuing your growth engine development. As always, get in the game, go do the hustle, go make it happen. We're going to catch up with you on another Open Mic podcast show real soon. Take care. Have a great week, guys. All the best.
You have been listening to The Open Mic, brought to you by The Success Hub. To find out more and to get the resources we have mentioned in this podcast episode, simply visit blog.thesuccesshub.io and view the podcast section. Thanks for listening, and we look forward to catching up with you in our next episode. This podcast and associated materials is published under copyright to The Success Hub. All rights reserved. No reproduction of this material is permitted.